So the Harvard Art Museum describes it this way, and the most important thing to note is the continuous narrative part. It says they say that the painting depicts a continuous narrative, and that's the key phrase that I want to hold on to. Then they say that Ravana holds on to Sita while he rides away in his donkey-drawn chariot, and in the top left corner, Rama is shown delivering the fatal shot to Maricha in the form of a deer, and in the far right corner is Laksmana, his bow at the ready, coming towards Rama. So you can see that there's a continuous narrative here, and there's actually four different scenes that are going on. One in the upper left corner, another in the upper right corner, and then so we have two on the top and then two on the bottom. And so we're going to get back to that in the next two slides. Just to summarize this painting, I want to emphasize that there are two general events that are occurring simultaneously in this painting. You have on the top above the orange line that I provided, you have the deer hunt, and then on the bottom below the orange line you have the abduction of Sita. So these two general events, the deer hunt and the abduction, are occurring at about the same time, and that's what the artist is depicting in this painting. So in essence, it is actually both a continuous narrative of four different scenes, as well as a more general depiction of two simultaneous events: Rama's killing of the golden deer and Sita's abduction by Ravana. In Western art, the concept of continuous narrative, or the juxtaposition of multiple scenes that form a logical sequence of events, is not necessarily common. But this is part of the problem of analyzing some of these Ionian works of art in Etruria, because they do have a continuous narrative. One author who has recognized that these Western art critics and scholars struggle to identify the distinction between a work of art that is depicting a continuous narrative versus a work of art that is not, is Joanna Williams. She explains in her book that one incentive to undertake this particular study came in the course of looking at a fine set of illustrations of a poetic text in a museum with a discerning American collector of Indian painting. He remarked, as we considered the 10th picture, "What a waste to have these together, where they become boring. Each one would be a masterpiece by itself." And this reaction is symptomatic of our treating as separate pictures images designed to be seen in sequence. And this is a quote from her book, The Two-Headed Deer, Illustrations of the Ramayana in Orissa. And she adds, Joanna Williams, on the same page, that the content of a single picture can be addressed in isolation. But for a series with narrative content, we must consider several images in sequence to understand how the story is told visually. This task is not peculiar to Orissa, so I focus upon images of the epic Ramayana, some version of which is known to virtually every Indian and which ought to have a place in the world's literary canon. So it's a lot to unpack here, but the main thing is that we have to analyze images in a sequence as part of a continuous narrative, and not as images that are isolated and unrelated to one another. And that is the problem with the analysis of the Caeretan Hydria in Boston. The classical scholars treat the two sides of the Caeretan Hydria, the front and the back, as independent scenes, but I view them both together as part of a continuous narrative. Now we will make an initial examination of the two sides of the Caeretan Hydria in Boston. which is called the Boston deer hunt. And that reflects the ignorance of the classical scholars, because there's a lot more to it than just a deer hunt or an abduction, or an interaction between a satyr and a maenad. So if we look at the front side here of the Caeretan Hydria, we see two young men who are practically nude, and they're hunting either one deer or multiple deer, or a stag, that is, with their bow and arrows. And look at how they keenly seem to lock in on the middle deer, which is also looking back at them with, staring at them directly with their eyes. So they're both staring at each other, and they're about to kill the deer. Now you might notice that there's an orange dividing line between the front side and the back side here on this slide, because I am trying to draw attention to the similarity between the top and the bottom of the Indian painting we just looked at and the front and the back of this painted water jar. So in the back side of the Caeretan Hydria on the right here, you see two different scenes actually, where a satyr is approaching a maenad and grabbing her by the shoulder and arm, and then on the left side of this backside jar, you see another painting where the satyr is carrying a maenad off and holding her firmly around the waist. So this is again what you would call a logical sequence of events. The satyr first grabs a hold of the maenad and gets control of her, and then he carries her off. So it's actually meant to be read in a logical sequence from right to left. Just like the scene in the front side of the Caeretan Hydria is also meant to be read from right to left, where you have the two nude hunters and they're attacking at least one stag, which is fleeing away to the left. So it's the action is clearly moving from right to left in both scenes, on the front side and the back side. But the back side is split into two different scenes that are part of a logical sequence. So we have a total of 3 different scenes here, just like we have a total of 4 different scenes on the Indian painting that I just described. And they're all part of a logical sequence and a part of a larger story. And clearly, you can see that this is also a golden deer episode being depicted here, but in the Ionian style. And that's why it's not exactly very easy to tell for a classical scholar, because they are not familiar with the Ramayana at all. But to a person like myself, it's quite obvious that this is another depiction of the Valmiki Ramayana, but in the Greco-Etruscan style. And we will get into more depth in the presentation about this. So to be more explicit, the continuous narrative that is being depicted on this Caeretan Hydria is the first event is on the front is the deer hunt of Rama and Laksmana hunting the golden deer Maricha. And then on the back side, the second part of the continuous narrative is Ravana approaching Sita and trying to grab her, and the beginning of the abduction. And then the third scene is Ravana is carrying Sita off to Lanka. So you have 3 different scenes here, and it's a very clear and logical, sequence of events. And in reality, just like the Indian painting that we just looked over, the 2 events are actually happening simultaneously. The deer hunt of Rama and Laksmana and the abduction of Sita by Ravana on the backside, they're happening more or less simultaneously. And it's so similar, and the parallel is so obvious with the Indian painting that it's remarkable. And I just hope that the viewer recognizes it as well. So just to summarize, the front side of the Caeretan Hydria with the deer hunt of Maricha by Rama and Laksmana is mirroring the top of the Indian painting we just looked at from the Harvard Art Museum. And the backside of this Caeretan Hydria where we see Ravana abducting Sita in a two-part sequence, is mirroring what we see on the bottom of the Indian painting at the Harvard Art Museum, where Sita is again abducted by Ravana. Now, obviously, the depiction is slightly different. Ravana is on foot in this backside of the Caeretan Hydria, but the implication is the same, and the meaning is the same, that he is carrying her off. And you can see that everybody has their own style, but the meaning is the same. You will also see variations in Indian art of how Ravana abducts Sita, which show him either on foot or on chariot. But the reality is that, it's unmistakable that this is Ravana abducting Sita.